for having a great month. I just read the newsletter this morning and I was inspired. I leaped out of bed and ran down the street just waving the newsletter in my hand. It was great. So all you folks that are starting to bust it, I've seen stuff coming in on the surveys. Rachel, big sales dropping. I see, Aaron getting up there breaking, what was it, 50K as a rookie, a newbie. Very exciting. Pizza, you were up there in the 30K land. So, I don't know. Very cool. Very exciting. And with pictures too, which is what I respond to. And I saw, I think it was Yoris apparently finishing a marathon. Is that true? Yeah. He didn't Photoshop himself into that? That's good. All right. So congratulations to everybody for having a great month, and better things will come. So we're going to continue our little journey on self-awareness. How many of you had a chance to get with somebody and either share a story or hear a story to determine your strengths? Good. Did anybody do the extra mile thing about writing to somebody and saying, send me a story back? Did you do the email version? That takes a little bit more time. Okay. Well, I encourage you to do that if you haven't, because it's a great way to figure out what your strengths are. Now, if you went the opposite route, the dark route, and said, well, share with me a story about when I really failed, when I was weak, then you learn some other things too. But last week was about strengths. If you have your handouts handy, does anybody have those? I did that with, yeah, good. And some of you printed them in color because you have a higher budget, and some of you are with the grayscale, and that's fine too. It works. But you'll need that to take a couple notes on. So we'll journey through this. All right. So self-awareness, let me kind of set it up. If you missed our last couple calls, it is a real buzzword if you're studying management issues right now. And it's the good reason for that. There's a lot of research that suggests that when we see ourselves clearly, we're more confident, we're more creative, we make better decisions, we build stronger relationships, we communicate better. And they also found that you're less likely to lie, cheat, and steal, which was good news for me and a huge motivator, because that was one of my biggest problems, was lying, cheating, and stealing. And now that I'm more aware of myself, I do less of that. But we're, yeah, we're better workers, they found. You get promotions if you're in that kind of a corporate setup, and you're more effective leaders. So this is an important topic. And I want to make a few points today. First of all, what you've got on your sheet is my kind of big point number one, that there are two types of awareness. So if you've got your sheet handy, there are two types of awareness. Let me just explain this. This isn't too hard to understand. There is first what is dubbed internal self-awareness, and that's what a lot of people think of. That's how clearly you kind of see your own values, how you fit into your environment, your reactions, your feelings and strengths and weaknesses. All that, what's going on inside your head is internal. So under the word internal, you can write how well we know ourselves. How well we know ourselves. Okay? So that's the first part. The second category is external self-awareness. And that is simply, you can write down underneath, how well we understand how others see us. How well we understand how other people see us. So research shows that people who know how other people see them are more skilled at showing empathy and taking other people's perspective. So this is very useful as a leader, for leaders who see themselves like the people that report to them do. Then those people have a better relationship with the leaders, the partners, right? So everything works better if you have good external self-awareness. Now, I got to share a story I think I've shared with the group before, especially some of you older guys who've been around for a few years. But this whole notion of self-awareness was brought home to me in a powerful way back when I was in my 20s as a young leader and manager. And I had taken a team of about 15 people, salespeople, to the field to sell with Southwestern, and we had what you might call a crappy summer. My team didn't do well at all. Half of them left. They quit within a few weeks. It was a bona fide disaster. And I thought that I had just recruited some real less than average people. Now, thankfully, in my leadership saga, my director said, look, here's your assignment. Now that this whole episode is over, you get to go back and visit with each of these people. Some of them did well, but a good majority did not do well or left early. They hung up their sales case, as it were, right? So I got with them one by one, had coffee, got a Coke with them, and just sat, and you know, they were really nice on the whole. And I asked them for feedback, you know, so that it wasn't so that I could learn more about self-awareness. It was really because I just wanted to get this over with and, you know, tell my director that I'd met with everybody and they were calm. So I sat down with the first guy. I remember it vividly. We were in a little restaurant and we were sitting there talking, and I said, you know, did the light talk at the beginning. And then I said, listen, his name was Fid. Yeah, you heard it right. Fid, F-I-D. He was from California. And Fid was an interesting guy. And he, you know, I said, so tell me about how the summer went, you know, how my management skills were, how did I come across, you know. And he said, oh, you were fine. You did a good job, blah, 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 you know. And that's how most of the conversation started. And then for whatever reason, God prompted me to say, hey, you know, no, seriously, tell me what I could do better on. Help me improve as a leader. And he said, well, and whenever anyone does that, they're like, well, and then he said this, which you never want to hear if you're asking for feedback. Do you really want to know? You know something good is coming. So I said, yes, I really want to know. And he said, well, I just found that you were hard to get to know. And I was like, really? Me? So my little vision of the world, if you look at that blue circle on the left side, how I saw myself, I would have written things like friendly, caring, helpful, fun, you know, positive things, people person. So here was a guy that was giving me feedback, which would be in the other circle, how he saw me, that was violently different. He said, you were kind of hard to talk to. And I was like, okay. And so we talked a little bit more, and I made a few notes, and I said, thanks for your time. Get out of here. And I was like, well, Fid is obviously crazy. He doesn't understand anything. So the next person I sat down with a couple days later, went to a place, got a little something to drink, started off, same conversation. And when I probed for information this time, they said, well, let's see, how would I describe you? You really want to know? And I'm like, oh no, yes, I do. and she said, well, you were selling up here and I was selling way down here, and I didn't feel like you could relate to my problems at all. I was like, wow, strike two. If you're talking about baseball, that is not what I saw myself. I mean, the circles were far apart. You get that? So I sat down with another person, and I won't tell you the whole story, but when he got down to a descriptor to describe me, he said, how would I describe you as a manager? Cold. And I was like, no, this is not right. Is there a conspiracy? And they hadn't sat down and done this together. This was all independent research, anecdotal research. But what I was discovering was how I saw myself in my own little world, and how I revealed myself to other people did not match. And so those circles that you see there, that I tried to make them overlap, and that really, if you want to complete the circle in my Venn diagram, you can draw a little dotted line, or if you want to. But the farther apart those circles are, the less authentic you are. Does that make sense? In other words, you may believe one thing about yourself, but if everybody around you believes something entirely different, you're really going to have a hard time communicating with people, getting along with folks, and being successful selling, right? So So here's what I tried to do. The next team I brought out, I really tried to let people know that I cared about them, and I tried to be interested in them, and I tried to, you know, ask better questions, and I tried to share something about myself instead of just, you know, digging in and finding out about them. So what happened with my next team, they did really well because I feel like those circles actually became much closer. There was a much bigger intersection on the Venn diagram, right? You guys with me? You remember Venn diagrams, right? So you'll never reach two completely congruent circles that are absolutely the same, but the closer they are with how you see yourself and how others see you, the better off people, everything will go better. I promise. You'll be more likable. People will appreciate you. They'll respect you more, and you'll certainly be understood. Right. So there you go. That's just a little story there. That was just a big slap in the face for me when I was 25 years old, but a useful slap in the face. I encourage you to seek out slaps in the face as much as you can, because that's how you grow and that's how you change. So here's the deal, though. It's tempting to kind of look at those two measurements, the internal and the external, and to try to value one over the other. But leaders have got to actively work on both of sides. They've got to see themselves clearly and get feedback to understand how other people see them. So folks that are highly self-aware are really focused on balancing that scale and making those circles close together. All right. So, and if you're like, I never really broke it up that way, I just had this vague knowledge of self-awareness. So to understand how you are, I'm going to send a link in the follow-up email that Momik sends out to everybody to a nice multi-rater self-awareness assessment from Insight. And I think that it's not a super long quiz or anything, but it'll give you some ideas that will help you. Now, if you look at the bottom of the page, here's what the quiz will help you with. See the little 2x2 map there that I sent you? It's called the 4 self-awareness archetypes, right? So just briefly, we won't spend a lot of time on this, but let's look at these real quick. You can see across the y-axis, you've got low external self-awareness to high external on the other side. And then on the x-axis, no, that was the x-axis, sorry. On the y-axis, we're looking at low self-awareness, and then up is high. So let's look at introspectors, top left. People who are introspectors have low internal or external self-awareness. They're not aware of how other people perceive them. They're super clear on how they are, but they don't challenge their own views or search for blind spots. Last summer, we talked about scotomas, or blind spots that everybody has. So if you can erase some of those by getting feedback from other people, that is a good thing. So people can, and I'll talk in just a minute about if you're too introspective, that can be bad. All right, bottom left, we've got people who have low internal self-awareness and low external self-awareness. So what do they end up being? Seekers. They don't yet know who they are. They don't really have a core. They don't know what they stand for or how their teams see them if they're in a leadership role. So they might be stuck or frustrated with relationships or in their job. So those are folks, that's kind of the worst place you can be, is unaware in your own head and also unaware how other people see you. All right? Then go next to that is pleasers. These are people that are really aware externally of how people, how they come across, but internally, not much happening. So they can be do you know people like this that are so focused on appearing in a certain way to other people that they have no, like they're like whoever they're around because they have no core. So that's not where you want to be. That's just somebody who's trying to please everybody, which doesn't work. And so the quadrant we're trying to get to is the awareness up in the top right. People who know who they are, what they want to accomplish, and they seek out and value other people's opinions. This is where leaders begin to realize real benefits. Okay? So I'll send you the quiz link. You can look at it and kind of ponder that a little bit, but not too much. All right. Big point number 2, if you're keeping score, and it's this: experience. And I'm stealing all this, by the way. If you're like, wow, Lee, you've really done a lot of research. No, This is from Harvard Business Review. It's where I've taken some of this research. Here's point 2. Experience and power hinder self-awareness. Think about that. Experience and power hinder self-awareness. How many of you know, or maybe at a previous job, you worked with somebody who had tons of experience, or they were like at the top of the corporate pyramid and they were not self-aware? Anybody know somebody like that? Yes, my hand's up. I'm not thinking about Dimitri either, by the way. But studies have shown that people don't always learn from their experience. And if you're highly experienced, you know, you're like, well, I've worked for 35 years in my area. It keeps you from doing your homework. It keeps you from being coachable. And you never question your assumptions. I worked with several directors in my previous life who'd each been at the company for well over 30 years. And some of them had a false sense of confidence. They were kind of stuck in their habits. Some were overconfident, but they all felt like, you know what? I know how to do my job. So don't bug me with change. Not cool. So that's a problem. Experience and power hinder self-awareness. Now, just because people have a title sometimes, senior people can have fewer people around them and above them who can give them feedback candidly, right? And the more power somebody wields, the less comfortable people are giving them constructive feedback because they think, you know what, I could lose my job. So as your power grows, this is for some of you like future reference that you're just starting, sometimes your willingness to listen shrinks because you just think you know more than everybody else. It's just kind of a natural phenomenon, especially if you're good at what you do. So anyway, here's the key. If you want to make sure that never happens to you, and you can write this down as a sub-point under number 2, seek out feedback from loving critics. This is from the article. Seek out feedback from 2 words, loving critics. That is, people who have their best interests in mind and are willing to tell them the truth. So if you know somebody that cares about you and is also brave enough to be honest with you, then seek them out and say, hey, I need some feedback. Tell me, you know, in this situation, this happened. What did I do wrong? How can I do things differently moving ahead? How would you assess me in this area? And just hope that they're honest with you, because most people won't be. They're like, oh, you're great, blah, blah, blah. Just like the people I met with initially, they didn't want to hurt my feelings or cause a problem, so they were just trying to be nice. So anyway, that's a good way to nip it in the bud. Seek feedback from loving critics. All right, point 3, last point, is introspection does not always improve your self-awareness. Okay? Introspection does not always improve your self-awareness. In other words, I would say, why doesn't help you? So we talked about this a month or so ago. Like, there were good questions you can ask yourself and bad questions you can ask yourself. And some of the bad questions started with the word why, especially if something isn't going well. So the problem with asking why questions is that most people, well, they're not asking good introspective questions correctly. They're using whys. So let me explain. When you're trying to understand your emotions, like you might say, why do I always feel frustrated on the phone? That's a why question. And if you had to ask a bad question, your brain always gives you an answer, and it just makes up something sometimes. Like, well, you're no good on the phone. That's why you're frustrated. And you're like, oh, darn it. Or you might think about your behavior. Why did I fly off the handle in that situation when that client mistreated me? Well, that's a behavior issue. Here's another why question. It's an attitude. Why am I so against all these changes that are happening? Okay. Those are not great questions. So as it turns out, because we invent answers to why questions, all the research shows that there's a much better way to ask questions. So think about this. Ask what questions? W-H-A-T. What questions, right? I knew, you know, a young manager who just blew up and had an altercation with someone that reported to her, and she just was almost in tears. She thought, well, I'm just not a leader. I'm not cut out for management. The problem was she hadn't eaten breakfast or lunch, and her blood sugar was low. But if you're asking, like, why am I acting like this? That's not going to give you a good answer. So what questions help us stay objective, future focused, and empowered? All right, let me give you a couple more examples to get the hang of it. It's kind of simple. I coached a salesperson, in fact, many over the years, who hated their job. That's what I hate what I'm doing. All right. Now, where a lot of them would get stuck is they would start asking themselves questions, the wrong questions, when they were stuck. And some of you get stuck and frustrated. So they'd say, why do I feel so terrible? Or why am I so bad at this? Well, here's a better question. What are the situations that make me feel terrible? What do they have in common? And then if you start to thread those together, you can go, oh, okay, here's something I can focus on and change. So the guy I talked to, he realized that wouldn't be happy in a sales career eventually, so he switched. Kind of gave him courage to change, and that's good. I knew a young lady who was a customer service leader who was kind of new at her job, and she needed to understand negative feedback she was getting from her customer care team, right? So instead of asking, why do these people say this about me, which is not a good question for self-awareness, we changed it to, what are the steps I need to take in the future to do a better job with the team? What question? Much better, much more empowering, okay? So self-awareness isn't just one truth, it's kind of a balance between these two. And if you ask the right kind of questions, if you're starting to think internally or reflect, that works well, okay? Let me give you one more study, and I'll wrap up and let you guys talk if you so desire. In one study, psychologists gave a group of undergraduates, university undergraduates, negative feedback on a test they took about their sociability, their likability, and how interesting they were. Okay, so those were the three scales, but they got super negative scores on purpose. So they divided the group, unbeknownst to them. Some were given time to think about why they were the kind of person they were, okay, and the other were asked to think about what kind of person they were. So when they evaluated all that, they found that the Y students spent their energy rationalizing and denying what they'd learned. Okay? That's all their energy went to that. The what students that asked what questions were more open to the new information and how they might learn about it. So that's something to kind of ponder. So here's what we talked about. We've got two different types of self-awareness, two different scales, internal in our head, external, what other people think about us. We got to figure out both to be effective. Second, as you continue to be productive and you grow and you develop your leadership skills and you have maybe different titles, or you've recruited a team and you're with them, well, the fact is experience and power can hinder your self-awareness. And the way to combat that is to get good feedback from loving critics, people who can criticize you, but care about you. You don't want to go to people who hate you and ask for feedback, because that is not useful and probably inaccurate, okay? And then third, we just talked about what questions or how questions, like we talked about a month ago. How can I turn this around? How can I make things better? How can I learn from this situation? What can I do differently in the future to improve? Those are much more useful questions because it puts your brain in a whole different area. Cool? Everybody nod your head? Yeah, okay, good. All right. So anybody have a thought, or if you have a similar story or an anecdote about some blast from the past that gave you self-awareness? Self-awareness comes from girlfriends, boyfriends, husbands, wives. They're really good at helping you with your external self-awareness. Are you aware that you haven't changed your underwear in 4 days? Wow. I hadn't noticed. Thank you for the feedback. Okay, I'm being silly. Anybody have a thought? Raise your hand, unmute. Okay, good. So here's your little assignment. I'll send you the quiz. You can do that if you like or not. But I left these circles blank so that you could take a few minutes at some point and then write down how you see yourself. What descriptors would you use to describe yourself? Okay. And then if you sit down with someone else, you can ask them to describe you and how you would, maybe some ideas on how you might improve. But anyway, jot down how other people see you, and hopefully they'll match. That means your circles are somewhat together. All right? Okay. Everybody looks really happy. There you go. Got a few smiles. All right. Thank you for tuning in this week. I wish you well. I'm not sure where we're going next week. We may move on to other topics. Katrin sent me some ideas. So we'll see what the deal is. If you have ideas and you want to be like Katrin, send them to me because I can go in lots of different directions with these leadership calls. So, all right, keep winning.